I think it's going to be easiest to get things started if I let you guys briefly introduce yourselves. We'll work our way down the line. And if you could also tell us how you arrived here today.
Hi, so my name is PEDRO. I come from the city of Lisbon, and I work close with the deputy mayor from the city. We call ourselves the managers of the city, and we have right now a very dynamic sharing ecosystem in the city. We have 3 car sharing operators, 3 moped sharing, 2 bike sharing, and 9 scooter sharing operators in a 500,000 people city. So it's very interesting.
And we're going to come to that in more detail in just a moment.
I walk from I walk from the train station.
Train and then walking. Okay, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen from Polis, which is a European network of cities and regions working together on sustainable urban mobility and urban transport innovation. So innovation is in our DNA, and as you can imagine, micromobility as a result has been high on the agenda lately. Lisbon as well as Brussels are 2 of our active members, and we've been talking a lot about how to regulate for innovation, to make innovation policy responsive as well as to help innovation thrive if it is policy responsive.
And how did you arrive here today? Did you take a scooter?
I took the 6:20 plane from Brussels, so I'll try to stay awake. And then a taxi, I'm afraid.
Caroline.
Thanks, Nate. Hi, I'm Caroline. I work at UITP, which is the International Association of Public Transport. It's a worldwide association that unites the sustainable mobility stakeholder community. So we have operators from all modes, also e-scooters, also car sharing, also waterborne transport, tram, buses, line, metros, you name it. We have the authorities as well and the cities that we work with. We have the whole industry, so software providers, but also vehicle providers. And we also work with academia and research, so we really try to unite the whole stakeholder community. We're active in more than 100 countries around the world. And I specifically work on shared mobility and what we call combined mobility at UITP, because we want to find out how we can combine public transport with other modes to create a complete mobility solution to finally beat up car ownership.
Did you arrive on a scooter, Caroline?
No, this morning I came by U-Bahn and S-Bahn and walking.
Okay, Martin, last but very much not least.
Hi, my name is Martin Lefranco. I work for Brussels Mobility, which is the regional transport authority for Brussels. I've been involved in shared mobility and mobility as a service strategy for a little bit more than a year. And I came yesterday with a train from Brussels, which was quite a struggle, actually a long trip. And this morning I wanted to try one of the scooters, because Berlin has the latest generations of scooters compared to Brussels, so I wanted to try one out.
Which one did you try?
A Lime.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you how it was, because that would be very unfair, but I'm glad one of us arrived on a scooter. I'm in the hotel literally next door, so it felt a bit ostentatious to take a scooter here, because it was about 4.5 steps. Well, thank you all for being very honest. Karen, I want to start with you, because we were talking just earlier on this morning about how the industry's changed over the last 18 months. It's still so young, but you have some interesting insights on how you think it's evolved in that period.
Well, I was happy to hear in the previous panel that they all want to talk to the cities, right? And work with the cities. That's how we think it should be. But indeed, there's been a change and also a change of attitude. The first generation, as we call it, of privately operated free-floating bike share companies that arrived in our cities, they did not talk to the cities. They deployed overnight. Suddenly, the city was full of colorful bikes. But as a result of that, they also left quite soon after that. So in the meantime, I think the industry has understood that if they want their companies to survive over time, if they want to find a sustainable model that is there to stay, that they need to talk to the cities. We represent the cities and the regions, so our members are public authorities, but we invest a lot in talking to the industry and in facilitating that dialogue. So we we've organized meetings where we brought our cities together with the operators to talk about what the best regulatory way forward is and what works for both sides, from the private sector perspective as well as from the public sector perspective, and also talking openly but in a constructive way about the challenges that we face also when it comes to the rollout of micromobility. And this is going well, and it's involving a lot of trial and error, but I think that's fine. I mean, we are going through a learning phase, and at the end of the day,
you're being so polite. Are they behaving themselves, and have they learnt certain lessons that you're glad they've learnt?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we all know how Uber arrived in a very disruptive way, but also in the meantime, I've been in panels where I ended up agreeing with everything they said, and they were agreeing with everything I said, and I was like, oh. So, I mean, there's been a change. Sometimes I do still wonder with some companies whether what they think and what they say is the same. In my case, I say what I think. And there will always be differences. I mean, you have the commercial perspective and you have the public interest. And of course, those are never fully aligned. So we do need that regulatory framework. We do need, or a soft regulation in the case of Lisbon. We do need a context that makes sure that this innovation is going to be policy responsive. Because if you just let it go, if you don't do anything, for sure it's not going to deliver on the policy goals that cities have. So there will always be different interests, but with the right framework, I think it can work.
Well, Pedro, tell me about Lisbon. Because you're doing some very interesting things in Lisbon. You're closing down streets and hosting scooter parties with police and the public, which sounds wonderfully fun. Tell us about that.
Well, the first thing I need to say is that we have a clear vision. We have set up a clear vision of how we want the city to deploy the mobility and who are the key partners for that. So we know that we are facing very severe goals. We signed the mayor's agreement. Our country signed the Paris Agreement. So we know that we need to go for carbon neutral by 2050. We need to accelerate this. We also have Vision Zero regarding to deaths related with road accidents. So in order to do this, the first thing we want to say is that to move people from one place to the other, taking them out of the cars, we need mass transit. So mass transit will always be the backbone of our eco-mobility system. So but then again, we need complementary services, and micromobility is going to play a major role. We called. It didn't work out, and in a few weeks they were out. All the others came and sit down with us, and we say, okay, let's agree. We have a few national legislation. We have some rules that we know that we want to set down. So we put them in a memorandum of understanding. We sign, and we ask. This memorandum, for instance, tells the operators that they have to give us real-time data. And if we agree on these rules, then they are free to deploy. And in the end, we make a close monitoring of their operations. We meet regularly in a monthly basis with all of them, all at the same table, and we explain them that, or we try to influence them in a sense for them not to see each other as competitions, but to look at the big pie and see there are half of the trips in Lisbon are made by car drivers, so that's your market. Let's all together work together to take the customers from there and not from each other. And I think it's playing well.
And Caroline, how does this compare to some of the other cities that you see on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, there's different approaches to take. So I think the one Lisbon is choosing is precisely the one to do, because, we have to recognize we're in a context of uncertainty here, and regulating in a context of uncertainty is very complex and shouldn't be rushed into. So I think it's a very good approach to try to build this innovation cluster, talk to the different partners and see, and then also see if there's some effects by monitoring what is happening in the impacts and trying out different things. So I think that's a good approach, but of course there's other cities that simply either do nothing and do not even talk to the people and just hope that it will go by, or others that just ban things because they decide that it doesn't fit their public policy goals, which, if it is not the case, is also okay. You know, it's the cities to take the lead that they can reach their sustainable mobility policy goals that they have set for the city. So I was wondering in Lisbon, now that you have this open approach and that you're trying to make each player understand what's at stake and that we shouldn't be fighting each other but fighting that big chunk of car drivers. Have you seen any evolution in there in car ownership in Lisbon? Are you monitoring this or?
Well, for the first time, so Lisbon is a 500,000 people city. The metropolitan area is almost 3 million. So, but for the city itself that I represent, we've seen the curve going down for the first time in 2017. So our model share for cars was roughly 48% and is now on 46%, which is still a lot. We have a goal for 2030 to have only 1/3 of the trips done by car. So it's ambitious from the city perspective, but we more or less have a plan on and know how to go, and micromobility definitely makes part of it. It's and so that's what we tell to the operators that come to the city. You want to deploy? We're very happy that you come, but we understand your business. We understand that you are a private company, that you have to make money. We'll be somehow tolerant on the free float, but there is a limit that we will not let you surpass. So it's the balance between keeping these guys alive and giving them time to adjust their business to what we define as the rules of the city, so that in the middle term, long run, they can replace car trips and be complementary to the mass transit, and in the end that we achieve our goals then.
And in Brussels, I mean, what stands out to you from what you've heard so far over the last few minutes as being similar or different in Brussels?
Well, it's nice to hear that we have a very similar approach than Lisbon. We've been trying to work together with the operators. Actually, early July, the Tour de France started. They had their first stage here in Brussels. And the track of the first stage was blocked for traffic, so it was going to be a total chaos in terms of traffic. So we decided to take this as an opportunity to promote other modes of transportation to people from Brussels and to the visitors. So we called all the operators and gathered them in a room, and we started to talk about them and what we wanted to do, and we realized that everybody wanted to share information and to work together. So we all decided, okay, let's do this on a more regular basis. And next time, we had 2 meetings for the Tour de France. Next time is going to be in 2 weeks, and we're going to have more people involved, actually, because I represent the regional authority, but Brussels Capital Region is made of 19 municipalities, and each of these 19 have their own mayor and deputy mayor in charge of mobility. So we have 20 visions for mobility, which is quite a challenge. So for the first time, we're going to have them around the table as well, and try to build something together. And from what I hear, it's working in Lisbon, so I hope it's going to work in Brussels. I think everybody has something to gain there, operators included.
Well, let's just change tack briefly, because we've been very positive about everything. And you know, the reality is that a lot of cities have seen some micromobility players either have to pull out or be told to get out. And I know that Brussels has been one place where some operators have left. I don't want us to be naming names or anything like that, but I am curious to get your sense of how do you get a company not only to want to be there, but to be able to stay there? And what's changing on that side of things?
Well, that's definitely a challenge for us in the following month and years, because I've been working also in the mobility as a service vision and strategy for us. We believe that MaaS is really an important solution in order to reach our goals for mobility by 2030. So we are going to have to rely on the operators. And our regulations for shared micromobility is license-based, so every operator joining the market has to see us and meet us and tell us some information before getting the license. But there's no regulations as to when the operators have to go out, get away. So we've had indeed a few operators coming during the summer, and then 2 weeks later they left without telling us anything. So, and actually I was surprised how big of a buzz it was in the press. A lot of articles and press were talking about it. And it's going to be a challenge for us, because how can you offer a quality of service to the end users if from one day to the next a few operators are leaving? I mean, it's hard to be able to cover, first of all, the whole territory of the region. And second of all, if different operators are leaving, it's hard to give a backup solution to the end user.
I want to go out on a limb and try and sort of provoke an exciting conversation about parking spaces. Karen, let's be excited about parking spaces. How could they be used better? And more broadly, space in cities. And what are you seeing that's working?
Yeah, many of the attention when it comes to e-scooters in particular has gone to the fact that they're urban clutter. I mean, they have caused problems, they are causing problems, I'm not going to deny that, but ultimately it comes down to the way our urban space is allocated in cities. It's a very powerful tool, it's a very valuable tool because urban space is scarce, and all these different mobility providers as well as different modes are fighting for their share of that urban space. And the fact that there are a number of problems at the moment with regard to micromobility and parking is also because they don't get the space they maybe deserve or will deserve in the future when they prove themselves to be valuable modes that contribute in a valuable way to an urban mobility ecosystem. When I see conversations going on about that tiny scooter that is blocking the way, and people just seem to be completely blind to the big monsters that are taking space, so much space in our cities, then I wonder, I mean, even the most green thinkers can be blamed of car-centric thinking and cannot see this big monster versus the tiny, cute thing that is blocking our way, but it's because they don't get the space they deserve. So reallocating and rethinking urban space is at the heart of any new mobility service, any urban mobility policy that wants to bring these new services into an integrated system. Because by prioritizing space for a certain mode, you prioritize that mode in the end. And by taking away space from another mode, you also make clear that maybe that mode does not belong in city centers anymore, or at least not to the same extent as it has been over the last couple of decades. So this is a powerful tool that is also at the core of any regulatory framework that we need to bring in. Having said that, we also need to be clear on the role that these services play. They will have to prove themselves. As you were mentioning, we need to look at the impact. As you were saying, public transport and active travel are the backbone of our mobility systems. If we see a modal shift happening that we don't want, then we may also want to take measures that reduce these services. We don't want people to stop walking and get on e-scooters. That's not the kind of modal shift we're looking for. So these service providers will also have to prove that they actually reduce car use, and cities can help by regulating in the right way. But also we don't have to fool ourselves and ignore that currently surveys show in a direction that this big substitution of car trips is not yet happening. So this is something we have to keep an eye on.
Caroline, you have a thought?
Yeah, I totally agree with Karen on the rebuilding our streets, and that obviously all these new players coming in require some of that space, and rightfully so, and meaning that we have to rethink how we build our streets, how we use the curb, how we can reuse space that we can gain back from car parkings and these sort of things. So this is why we're leading a big research work on that at UITP, and we want to publish policy recommendations for decision makers on that. But we're coming to a point where we look at all the different modes and their needs in terms of space on mobility. But yeah, space is still scarce, and it will always be. So we need to come to some sort of prioritization of different modes, you know, and so I was wondering if the cities, what could be the criteria and the indicators, because some options might be healthier than others, because we also have like big city goals in terms of getting a more healthy population, bettering the air quality and these sort of things. So have the cities thought about some criteria, sort of set up a hierarchization of this is the most efficient use of space and this mode should get more space than another one or something?
Well, let's ask Brussels and Lisbon.
Can I jump in? Just to say that when we start looking at and studying and learning along with the operators since 1 year now, the first thing that we notice is that a scooter or a bike outside is either being ride or is stopped. Yeah, so we have to look at these both things. So now we're talking when the scooters or the bicycles are stopped. What we came to the conclusion that we had very few parking places, and that for the free float, with parking places, with so few parking places, the free float would bring scooters to the sidewalks, and we don't want that. So we set up a team that tripled the number of parking places in the last 3 or 4 months, and we have we defend that free float will. We think that free float will eventually. When there is enough parking places, free float will be substituted by mandatory checkout in parking places. For that, we are telling the operators that we are going to put in place one parking place between every 2 corners. So in each block, there is going to be one parking place, maximum distance 150 meters. And if we can manage this, then we feel that we can demand for the operators to have mandatory checkout in these parking places. And when we achieve this, then parking will no longer be a problem, and pedestrians will be happy, the city will be happy, and we think this could be done without harming the business of the operators. Operators, when we tell them this, they don't like the idea, but I think that this is going to be the way to do it.
Is this going to be similar in Brussels?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, our priority is and will remain walking and cycling, for sure. But what we've observed in less than a year with micromobility is a huge growth. I think we've reached, well, we don't have the numbers very accurately yet, but we're close to 1% of modal share, which is a tremendous growth. So we cannot stay just without action with it. So it's hard to put it in one of the different existing modes of transport. I mean, the pedestrians and cyclists are saying, no way, it's not an active mode of transportation. So we are thinking of maybe creating a new section, indeed. But it can be a tool for us to make wider and bigger infrastructure for cycling. Especially in the fact that our regulation says that scooters and e-bikes are limited to 25 kilometers an hour, so it's the same range of speed. So it makes sense to use this as a tool for us for better infrastructure.
I mean, you're also up against public perception as well. I mean, it was quite nicely illustrated at an event I was at yesterday, with a photograph of a sidewalk, and in the front of the picture there was a moped on the sidewalk parked. A little further back there were 2 scooters propped up against the wall, and the question was which one annoys the public more. And of course the answer was the scooters. I mean, I actually noticed further in the distance someone had parked a forklift truck on the pavement, which I would have thought was a bigger issue, but that's a question for another day. But I mean, how do we sort of get around this issue that some members of the public just don't want to see new forms of transport on the street, like scooters? Karen, is this something that comes up? Paolo?
It doesn't only apply to e-scooters. Actually, what cities need to do is always have this very careful balancing act between what a city needs and what an individual wants. And that's most of the time not necessarily aligned. So I mean, we're talking, it's a buzzword as well, but co-creation seems to be the answer these days, involving your citizens also in the policies that you develop and explaining why you're doing the things you're doing. But also raising awareness with them that actually, as I mentioned before, the biggest space polluters are not those scooters, but are still the cars. And how many times, I'm a cyclist, are you confronted with a bike that is blocking the cycle lane? many more times than I'm confronted with, and I work in Brussels with an e-scooter that is in my way. So it's really a matter of getting away also from traditional perception. But it is true that this negative buzz has been created, which is not easy to get away from. A funny anecdote that one of your colleagues told me about Lisbon is that, you know, in order to address the issue of urban clutter and the irritation that this caused among the people, some initial measures that were taken were the reallocation of car parking spaces to e-scooter parking. And people had been so pissed off with the scooters that they said, great! And normally when you take car parking away, the first thing they will do is, you know, go on streets and demonstrate. So it's just indeed a matter of perspective. They were so pissed off with the scooters that they welcomed the reallocation of car parking to e-scooter parking. So
yeah, it's true that our mayor said at some point, okay, we need parking places. I'm taking 2% of all car parking in the city to allocate to two-wheelers.
Well, I mean, my timer over here says just over 4 minutes, which means we've only got about 10 minutes before we get kicked off stage. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask about the role of data in cities, because the companies generate a lot of it. We're also, thanks to GDPR, in a very different time to what we would have been in, say, 5 years ago. But also, data can be extremely useful for cities in helping understand where the pain points are, particularly around public transit networks. But there doesn't seem to be a consensus from cities or providers on what that data should look like. How should it be provided? Should it be shared? And I wondered if we could just spend a couple of minutes talking about the role of data in how cities and the private companies should be working together. Who is most excited about this topic?
Well, Brussels is, for sure. It's really exciting to see, to be able to see what we can do with all this data. For the moment, regulations are very light. It's supposed to come on a quarterly basis in the form of a report, a PDF report, basically. So it's very, very light. But we're also trying to find out a software solution. We're going to start a pilot project with one of the providers. And we realize, as an authority, that we are in a learning curve. We know, I mean, we think we know about the potential of these data, but we want to test it out and see how it goes. And then from that stage, we can maybe try to think of new regulations in order to refine the data that we need.
Karen, you got a view?
Yeah, we're talking a lot also to cities in the US to see what they have been doing. I mean, the deployment of these new mobility services happened there first, and they're also, they have been looking at the data dimension a bit longer than we have. So we're currently also talking to our member cities to see whether the mobility data specification that LA has developed could be something that can be taken forward as well in a European context, provided it's GDPR compliant. But it's instrumental, absolutely. I mean, in terms of sharing that data, knowing that cities know what is actually going on in the network, and also linking back to what I said earlier, that we have more intelligence about what the actual modal shift is that is happening. So,
yeah, well, we were looking into data. Actually, we demand all the operators that come to operate in Lisbon to give us real-time data. You cannot operate in the city if you don't give us this data.
And is this real time as in like literally where an individual rider is at any given moment?
Right now, we're not into the trips yet, namely for privacy issues, but also because we're still learning. Yeah. So right now we are focusing on scooters and bicycle or vehicles that are stopped. But we didn't know how to, manage this, so we went to study, and then we figured out that there are a few standards over there. We studied them, and we decided that MDS was going to be our standard. MDS developed by LA. Then in January we had a very nice meeting in Polis, hosted by Polis in Brussels, and we met other cities, we met other operators and software providers. And right now we have a clear idea of what we're doing, and we came home and said to all the operators, you have to give us your data in MDS. and after a few weeks, they were giving it. So right now we are aggregating. We are the only ones who can see all the panorama of the city. We have an aggregator and a dashboard, but we are talking with all the software providers to see where this is going, and just playing our role.
We have got about 20 seconds. I don't want to give our organisers a heart attack, so you get the time, Caroline.
Okay, no, just coming back to that data, I think it's important to link it to an objective of where we're going to go if cities collect the data, and I think that mobility as a service is a very good tool for cities if through putting up a mobility as a service platform, they can connect and collect the data from different transport operators, because having the transport operators only from one operator doesn't show you really what's happening in your city. What you need to have is the data of everything that is moving around, and then it becomes a really effective tool to optimize the network and rethink the infrastructure and thinking about how you can use different things. So I think putting it into a wider objective that will help you to realize your vision is essential when cities think about data, and not only data for data, but what for and what's our aim.
Okay, well, we're only a minute over, so I have to wrap it up there. I'm afraid we could go on all day, and I would be very happy to if we could. But Martin, Caroline, Karen, and Pablo, thank you ever so much.